Hey guys, it's Alex, and today's top 5 video is my top 5 favorite childhood books. I know middle grade March is going on and that's a big deal for a lot of people, but these aren't middle grade books, these are actual children's books for little kids, most of which I remember my parents reading to me when I was very little. I had never talked about these before, so I just kind of decided that it was time. Some of these are my favorites, and I don't know how popular all of them are. I know some of them are very popular, but with kids' books, it's kind of hard to tell sometimes because when you're a child, you're not really aware of that kind of thing. These are just the 5 favorites that I really remember. The first that I'm going to start with is the only one that I don't actually own, and I don't know why because it's probably my favorite on this list, and that is Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. I loved this book so much when I was a kid. My father used to read it to me all the time. I'd make him read it to me, and we must have gone through that book a few dozen times. It was so lovely, so fantastic. I'm absolutely terrified of spiders, but that's the only book I'm okay with spiders in. It's the story of some animals on a farm. The main character is a pig, his name is Wilbur, and because he's on a farm, he's probably going to be raised for meat, which is traumatizing for a small child. But then Charlotte the spider is very, very smart, so she decides to start putting words into her web like some pig, so that the farmers will think that the pig is something special. And the story is kind of just about their friendship, and it's really lovely and really sad and one of my favorites. The second book on this list is The Stinky Cheese Man and Other Fairly Stupid Tales by John Scieszka and Lane Smith. This is a satirical children's book that pretty much riffs off of typical fairy tales. It's really funny. It's like kid humor, and it's just that little bit older when you understand the fairy tales, so that if you get this right after you understand the fairy tales, it's really funny. It's also kind of dark, but I loved this when I was a kid, and before I filmed this video I was kind of flipping through just to see how I'd feel about it now, and it's still really funny. I think part of the humor of this book is just the shock value. One of the stories in this, just for an example, is The Really Ugly Duckling. I think we're all aware of the story of the ugly duckling, but in this book, the really ugly duckling is really ugly. But the really ugly duckling isn't worried about this because he knows that one day he will grow up to be a swan and be bigger and better looking than any other duck in the pond. But in reality, he just grows up to be a really ugly duck. And it's funny. The illustrations in this are also kind of fantastic. And I just remember this book so fondly. I thought this was the greatest thing when I was little. The next book on this list is The Raggy Taggy Toys by Joyce Dunbar and P.J. Lynch. This is the story of Hannah, who's a little girl who collects all the Raggy Taggy toys. It doesn't matter how ugly they are, how worn they are, she just loves them all. And her mother gets tired of it because her mother has to clean up after them. So her mother tells her that she has to get rid of all of her toys. And then it sort of gets dark, and the mother sort of falls into a trance, kind of, and becomes her younger self and plays with the toys again, and rediscovers her playful childhood side, and it's really sweet. And I just remember as a kid, it made me so happy, even though, the whole toys kind of taking over her was a little bit, scary. I'm not explaining that well, but it's a children's book. It's so lovely, but I adored this when I was a kid, because, it's about an adult, kind of. The main character is Hannah's mother, and she does become a child again for part of the story, but it was just so much fun, because, most kids' books aren't really about the adults in them, they're more about, the children themselves, so I don't know. I really love this, and when I was going through my shelf, this was one of the ones that I definitely had to put on this list. The next book on this list is The Rainbabies by Laura Krauss Melmed and Jim LaMarche. This looks a little bit strange, just based off the cover, but it's a really lovely story about an old couple who could never have children, and one day they find Rainbabies. They're these little teeny tiny babies, and there are 12 of them, and they have to protect them from all the evils in the world, and it's very dramatic and adventure. And then at the end, the moon goddess comes and takes the rain babies away and gives them a human child of their own. And it's just a really lovely, heartwarming story. I remember adoring this when I was a kid. They named their human daughter Raina, and I think I had 3 baby dolls that I named Raina because of this book. But it was so sweet and lovely, and honestly, the illustration style in this is a lot more realistic, which is kind of weird looking for the cover, but on the inside it's really, really beautiful. And the final book on this list is Eloise by Kay Thompson and Hilary Knight. I loved Eloise when I was a kid. This is the story of a 6-year-old girl who lives in a hotel. Her parents are very wealthy and essentially abandon her to the care of the workers in the hotel and her nanny, which as an adult is a little bit sad, but as a child I had no awareness of this, so I thought she lived a grand life. It's basically Eloise and her adventures causing trouble. And she's such a bratty, snotty little kid, but in like such a fun way. This just has such a fun writing style, and I always loved reading Eloise. I have read probably this whole book cover to cover several times because Eloise was one of my favorites. This is originally from the 50s, I believe. It's an older children's book, but such a classic and so, so wonderful. So these are some of my favorite children's books. Let me know if you've read any of these, if you remember any of these from your childhood, and let me know what some of your favorite childhood books are, because I still like flipping through my old ones. I don't do it as often as when I read them as a kid, but I do pick them up on occasion and just look at all the pictures and the lovely stories. I still think it's a really fun thing to do. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see y'all again soon.